Hey, Mistakes listeners, this is your host, Dave Gidney, and I want to introduce yet another episode of ours, episode 3. In this episode, we look into Star Wars The Clone Wars. Pretty interesting stuff. This podcast was recorded on 6/28/2015. I hope you enjoy the show. Here we go. How you doing, friend?
Good. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Can't see you.
Really? You can't see me?
I can hear you.
Oh, that's not good. But you
Ah.
can hear me, right?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Do
5x5.
Do you need to see me?
No, not
Oh, okay.
necessarily.
Well,
I mean, I have just sort of your standard smiling mug as my default picture. I don't know. I don't know if that aids interaction or not.
Really?
Well, I don't
Okay.
know.
Okay. Well, does that help?
There you are.
Yes.
See,
Yeah. Yeah.
animated Dave.
The problem is I'm such a good-looking guy.
You are.
Right. It's true.
Yeah, it's distracting.
I find it distracting.
Yes. I don't know how you get out of the bathroom in the morning. You just stand in front of the mirror and just say, "Hey, what a good-looking guy."
It's a struggle.
I
So
understand.
yeah. Hey, but tonight I wanted to clarify a few points after we've done 2 episodes, right?
Yeah.
And
Clarify away.
Okay, so I wanted to reiterate that I am not an expert. Are you an expert?
I'm not.
Yeah. And I can already tell that in the couple of episodes that we've actually had that I wanted to again repeat that I am not an expert. That when I make my blanket statements, it's because of my ignorance, and I'm going to try my darndest as we move forward not to make blanket statements. Are you on board with that show, or are you into making blanket statements too?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we all make blanket statements to a certain extent, I suppose. We all have an anecdotal perspective. How about that?
True. I just need more misnomers because my mouth is a big fat mouth, and I say a lot of things sometimes that I want to make sure people know that I am not an expert, and that I'm trying my best to be as open-minded as I can as we look at these shows.
Yep.
And again, I want to be careful with saying I'm the definitive source because I'm sure that there are going to be people that call us or write us in and say you are not the definitive source, and that's true. I'm just another voice, another talking head on the internet.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, and what are you?
I'm your co-talking head.
That's good. That's good. So, do you want to dive right into it tonight?
Sure.
So,
Okay.
What?
Clone Wars.
Yeah.
So we're doing Clone Wars tonight. We are doing the cartoon series, not to be confused with the cartoon movie.
Right.
But cartoon series. I think most people know this, but I suppose we should just, tell them anyway. This is a Star Wars vehicle. If you have not heard of Star Wars, then, wow, that's, in Western society, that's pretty impressive. But hey, I suppose it's possible. I know there are people that have not seen the Star Wars movies. This is a cartoon. It started in 2008. And I guess it also wrapped up in 2014. The final episodes did.
That is correct.
For those of you who follow the Star Wars canon, as it were, these episodes are set between the movies Episode 2 and Episode 3.
And they are still considered canon.
Yes.
Because we know that JJ and crew threw out a lot of the canon a couple of months ago.
Yeah. As a side note, for those that don't really understand the whole Star Wars and Star Trek universe, there is heavy debate amongst fans as to what should be included in sort of the grand story of things. On the level of debate about holy scriptures. Would you say that is fair?
Yes.
People
100%.
are very passionate. Yes.
Absolutely fair. Although, to clarify, Star Trek and Star Wars are two different,
They
totally
are.
separate things.
I'm just trying to generalize. I know I'm generalizing. I shouldn't generalize with such delicate matters, but just
After my misnomer at the beginning of the episode, you go ahead and just cross genres because
I
Star
know,
Trek
sorry.
and Star Wars are not even in the same genre.
I know they're not, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for the listeners. Anyway, so Yeah, so this is a cartoon series. Features many of your favorite Star Wars characters. Anakin Skywalker sort of delves into more of his, I don't know if we want to say development or decline, as it were. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, that sort of thing. So, without getting too deep into all the characters, tell me what you think about Clone Wars.
So, this was so. What's interesting for us is that we kind of just say, let's just pick this episode, right? And I actually happen to be a huge Clone Wars fan, so it was hard for me to actually watch this particular episode because what I wanted you to experience was the more flashier episode. But I thought, no, this is fair. This is just the random pick, and this is what we got. I will say, just being a fan of the show, that there are two types of episodes. There is a political intrigue episode, and then there's just the straight-up action episode. And this happened to be very politically heavy.
Yes, I could sense that.
So that aside, if this is, say, my first experience watching the show, one of the things I've always had a difficult time kind of adjusting to is the animated style of the show. It actually has a very distinctive style. And it almost feels like puppets. Like when you're watching them walk or when you're watching them interact, they look like mannequins, sans any strings, right? It's a very particular style to kind of get used to. I can't say it's always been my favorite, but it is something. It is heavily stylized. Again, over time it's kind of grown on me. This particular episode, that particular animation even drives home even more when the political aspects are going on how quote unquote unexciting an episode can be.
Okay.
And I did not find this episode all that exciting. I did find it. How can I say this? It's interesting to look at. I'd have to say that the political intrigue of it, basically Padme's going to make a deal with the Separatists. She is going to manipulate the Jedi to actually get to the Separatists. It's an opportunity for Ahsoka to kind of go on her own a little bit and actually kind of make some of the moves that her mentor would make, which would be Anakin, which is always an interesting tension in the show, is like, how is Anakin teaching Ahsoka in the ways of basically the ways of the Jedi, but it's more or less Anakin's ways of the Jedi. I have to say, not one of the stronger episodes. I wish I could really I really had a good time. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, what was your take on it?
So I guess start with my positives. I mean, the hard part with watching this type of content, I think particularly for people like you and me, people of our age, is that we grew up with Star Wars. And I am a fan. I'm a fan of the whole thing. So that can sometimes be difficult when you're a parent because you have to sort of separate out that long-time fanship with what may or may not be appropriate for the child. So I would say it has a fairly high production value. I don't really... since I don't watch a ton of cartoons, I don't really get a ton into like the stylized versions of it. I mean, I see some animation where I say, well, that looks kind of different, and I'm not really sure why that's appealing to kids and that sort of thing, but apparently it is. As you said...
I think it's appealing because it does look like puppets. I
Okay.
do. I think there's an
Fair
aspect to it where they look like... There's an approachability for kids in that they kind of do look like puppets. And believe me, when puppets are in town... When I take my kids to a puppet show, they are sucked into it at this age.
Correct. I think there were a good, in general, nice sort of moral message about how it's good to negotiate, when there's a conflict as opposed to just fighting with people. That's a nice thing. I don't know if the writers are really trying to have have a general sort of genre of peace or not. This particular episode did. And... as you said, political intrigue. Good questions being asked throughout by characters about the political process. And you never really know whether or not, writers that are writing this type of material are critiquing the political systems in our real world. Because some of the questions and some of the comments and some of the opinions you listen to and you kind of go, I could really take out the whole Jedi thing and just insert our government and the way it works, and it would sound sort of the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, you know what? The more I think about it, yeah, that is totally. Again, being a fan is hard for me to separate sometimes between what really makes me go on a Clone Wars episode, which is usually a really cool lightsaber duel. But yeah, there's some really strong messages in that Ahsoka is like, I've only known these type of separatists. I didn't know that you guys actually exist on the other side of the line. There's more depth to my enemy than I thought. And that is actually a really strong message to this particular episode, and that is a big plus.
Correct.
Now, again, targeting to their audience, will their audience get that, or are they like me looking for Star Wars lightsaber battles?
Correct. And that sort of gets me to my concerns, which I got to say right off the bat, this is not a kid's show. I just don't see it as a younger kids show. One, for the content, they're just not going to get it. I mean, there are some political complexities to the content that is just going to go over kids' heads. Mm-hmm. And, the flip side of that is sort of the violence of the show. It's fairly pronounced.
Yep.
I would say. To the point where you don't have, buckets of blood being thrown on a screen like it's a DMV video or something like that, but you do have definitive death. You do have bodies strewn about. And so I look at
to make a comparison for sure. Again, I think we should pull more on some of the not the stuff that we've seen, but just pulling on my history. You're right. G.I. Joe, no one ever died, right?
Correct.
I think at one point...
Worst shots in all of history.
Exactly. And if they actually did shoot something, it was probably a robot of some sort, or a tank blew up and you could see the guy get out. So that is certainly not going to be happening on the Clone Wars. And you're right, the scene in which the droids go in... So the premise, again, is that Padme Amidala is trying to do some peace negotiations with the Separatists, and they almost get to the point where they're going to negotiate peace with the Separatists and the Old Republic, or the Republic. It looks like it might happen. But of course, the nefarious evil guys behind the scenes do not want that to happen. They want the war to continue for either profit and power. And what they do is they basically blow up a power center on Coruscant, basically a terrorist attack. So there's that too. It's a straightforward terrorist attack, possibly on a 9/11 scale. And there is quite a bit of murder to be able to have that occur. So these droids enter this power plant and just carte blanche, just kill everything in sight. And it's implied, but these guys are just basically pointing lasers into their faces and blowing them away.
Correct.
Which is pretty rough.
It is. Now, I think in some ways we go back to the question of being desensitized. Do kids today, are they just used to that? I sort of threw out the question. I was sort of making some notes of sort of saying, is there a assumption that because it's on the Cartoon Network that it must automatically be for children? Although, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that this show, when it was on television, aired later in the evening. Did it not?
It did.
So
it did.
I don't know if that creates sort of an invisible line where the network is sort of saying, we might show some stuff later on that's maybe a little bit geared towards a little bit older a child.
How much Cartoon Network have you watched?
Well, not a ton.
Okay.
Well, I don't.
I don't mean to show you up.
Yeah. Hey, I'm okay.
I can't say that I've watched a ton of Cartoon Network, but as the day goes on, it really does start off with a youthful vibe, and as it continues to go out to the day. So the Clone Wars actually kind of sat in this prime time slot. Yeah, it was a prime time slot, no doubt about it. And then it goes on to their Adult Swim content, which is pretty much right. There's a point in which the kids kind of tune out, and I would say that Clone Wars actually sat at the point in which kids were to be tuned out.
Okay.
But I can imagine that a 13-year-old boy would be like, I'm going to watch this. As a 13-year-old boy, yes, I watched quite a bit of A-Team and Knight Rider and all those primetime shows I watched, which actually did have a lot of adult content in them.
They did.
And I think that's what this is striving to be, is that, I don't know if it's a father-son bonding time or father-daughter for that matter. But yeah, as the evening goes on, it just switches right into Adult Swim, which is actually pretty hardcore.
Hence the title, Adult Swim.
Correct. And it's
Right.
pretty crazy at that point.
I think one other thing that I noted from this is that as with a lot of other cartoons or just shows in general, it's fairly easy to tell these are the good guys, these are the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. It keeps the story simpler. The interesting thing about the good guys is that they are allowed to break some rules themselves, but always under the general umbrella of they're doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
So as you said, they are trying to set up negotiations, although they have been told the law is you're not supposed to talk to these people.
Right.
We do not negotiate with terrorists. And they go ahead and sort of bend the rules, sort of ask for...
No. They bend the rules.
Well, they bend the rules.
Yeah.
But it is sort of seen in an approving way. Now, again, it's questioned a little bit.
Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic. Again, watching the show that I've watched. So just taking this into account. This is Anakin Skywalker. He disapproves of what they've done. But this person is going to become Darth Vader at some point. I think he
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, exactly. I think this person disapproves of what's done because he's actually not involved in it. I think, going around his back, he just wants absolute control. My gut says that he doesn't like what occurred because he just wasn't in control of it. And as we know, that character in time will want absolute control of everything. Of course, what I fear here is that I'll get into like a Star Wars debate.
Right.
Here I'm going to talk how I
Yeah, don't talk
like
about
fan.
no Star Wars
Right.
debates.
Again, is this for kids? Not this episode. If that makes sense. Does it enhance the Star Wars experience as an adult? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some interesting takes on events that surround the movies. Again, this is one of those weird ones where I'm like, in this particular episode, I'm not sure what this is offering folks, other than there's some moral dilemmas, and most likely there's a setup, right? So we see Coruscant in fire at the end of the episode, which means there's going to be some sort of retaliatory strike.
Correct.
Somehow they're going to have to go after this. And again, my 13-year-old boy says, oh, I can hardly wait because the Jedi are just going to go crazy. Or there's going to be some sort of fight with the Republic versus whoever, or trying to investigate how this occurred.
Yeah, and I get back to the combination of, I think, sort of really obvious violence and complexities of the plot. When you put those two together, it's difficult to say to a parent, well, this episode's appropriate for younger kids, but this one's not.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You can watch episodes 2, 4, 7, and 12. It doesn't really work that way. You sort of either watch this as a show, because it is continuous.
Yeah.
There is an encapsulated story within each episode, but this is ongoing. They are not going to wrap this up real nice and tight after each episode like a situation show.
Yeah, the show that comes to my mind as a kid that I watched a ton of was Star Blazers, and there was tons of violence in that. There was death and mayhem all over the place. Those guys did not escape when a problem occurred. and I absolutely adored it and loved it. Was it appropriate for me to watch? And that's where this gets really weird. Because I'm like, who is their target audience? Like, for me, Star Blazers, my father would never spend any time watching that show.
No.
But as a 13-year-old boy or 12-year-old boy, I'm like, I was glued to the TV because there's a lot of jeopardy and excitement involved. And I feel like Clone Wars has a lot to offer in that. But I'm having a hard time listening to you. I'm like, yeah, there's just a ton of violence. And again, even in Star Blazers, you never saw Derek Wildstar shoot somebody in the face. It just didn't happen.
Correct.
Now, of course, they might blow up a ship with a wave motion gun, but it always seemed disconnected, right? And in fact, I would say even in A New Hope, when they blow up Alderaan, it's disconnected. Like, I'm like, oh, they blew up the planet. It's more exciting that the explosion occurred.
Right. There's a psychological distance.
Right.
So.
But then again, so the question then is, Star Wars is PG.
Yes.
This lines up with that perfectly. I would say, yeah, I can't really say that a 13-year-old boy should be watching the Clone Wars without. Could we add a parental guidance, like saying watch it with your child at an appropriate age? Like, because every parent sits down and says, "This is the time we are going to watch Star Wars," right? And when I saw Star Wars, clearly I was too young to see it. There are images from A New Hope that still scar my mind. Quite literally, because I saw it when I was 7 and it was too much. And I would say that Clone Wars completely lines up with anything that you would see in any of the movies.
There you go.
So I don't. Is there a category for, hey, you need to figure out what's appropriate for your child when watching this episode? But probably, here it is, probably watching this alone, probably not such a great idea. You think you probably need to determine what you want your child watching and having them to make a decision that, like, how about this? Star Wars The Clone Wars is not fire and forget. Hey, kids, just go off and watch what you want. I think that there's a lot of, we call this over-the-shoulder watching with your child, and I would say this is one of those cases.
Yeah, and as they get into high school, that changes a little bit, but still, this is something that some parental guidance is probably justified.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, my friend?
I think that's good. Clone Wars.
So you can follow us on
Twitter.
You want to?
So Twitter.
I'm an old man. I don't know what I'm talking about.
So for those of you, well, you can check out all of our episodes on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is Parent Mistakes. Our podcast in general is called Parenting Mistakes, but that was too many letters for Twitter. So we are Parent Mistakes on Twitter.
It's nice.
I hope you check it out. Okay.